All right, welcome to my channel. I'm Ryan. Before I get started, I'd like to say a couple things. The first is to Chuck and my dad. Without you two, I never would have even considered making a YouTube channel. The next would be to Caleb and Avery. You guys are always kicking my butt and making me refine my process with shooting and coaching in that matter too. And then Monty and Mike for getting me interested in competitive and combat shooting in the first place. All right, so my qualifications, why I should be able to teach you, is my mom thinks I'm the most handsome out there. But seriously, I'm the state marksmanship coordinator for my state and senior instructor in the National Guard. I've trained over 500 airmen and soldiers. I've ranked first in excellence in competition, third in 3-gun, second in pistol, third in special zero at the regional level. And the last 2 years I have been first place for the times on speed steel, but there's a little bit of a handicap there because I'm the one who designed the stage for it. So now we're gonna get into the actual meat and potatoes of this video. All right, one thing to note is that I don't teach tactics. I don't teach any sort of unit doctrine, none of that. I teach how to shoot and how to shoot only. So I'm gonna teach you how to shoot for precision and speed, and how you can best apply those to your practices, but it's up to you to take these procedures and apply them to your own TTPs and doctrine for yourself. I'm training based off of a progressive overload framework, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the shooting at its most raw form, no variables whatsoever, and then add small variables along the way. And then also introduce some more things that you can add to your training to make it more suited for whatever you're training for, whether it be defensive pistol or you're looking to improve your rifle marksmanship for combat training. All right, we're gonna open up this conversation with safety. First and foremost, nobody outranks general safety. And so we're gonna look at the 4 golden rules of firearm safety. The first of which is treat every firearm as if it's loaded. The second is never allow your muzzle to sweep past something you don't intend to destroy. The third is going to be keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. And the fourth is know what your target is and what lies beyond it. But I always like to cite a 5th rule because in dry firing, we have to violate some of those rules. So the 5th one that I like to talk about is to always know the condition of your firearm. And so what I mean by that is pointing it in a safe direction, ensuring that you've cleared the pistol, which we'll go over clearing procedures next. But I'm going to make sure that the pistol itself is clear, there's no sources of ammunition, there's no bullet inside, and that there's no ammunition that could somehow jump into my chamber, as long as I know the condition of my weapon, right? Like I've looked inside the chamber, then I can dry fire, and I know that there's no harm that could happen. Now, where accidents happen here is if I don't remove the sources of ammunition from the area. So whenever I'm doing dry fire practices, I completely remove ammunition from the environment. So I'll take any ammunition out of the magazines, put them in a Ziploc bag, put it somewhere else. I also do a gear check, so I check all of my magazines. I push down on the follower, make sure that there's no soot-covered rounds in there, and then I check inside of my pouches as well to include the dump pouch, and then pockets, anywhere that I'm gonna put a magazine, I'm gonna check all of those areas and ensure that there's nothing that can get into my weapon itself. All right, before we can get into actually manipulating our pistol, we wanna understand what each control does. So on this pistol, I have a safety. Not all pistols have that, but this one does. So if you do have a safety, make sure you're actually utilizing it. Next is going to be this little tab right here. That's your slide lock release. That'll lock the pistol slide to the rear when you run out of ammunition, or if you pull it back and lock it yourself manually. So what that allows you to do is check inside to clear it, or it alerts you that you've ran out of ammunition. And then when you depress it, then your slide goes back forward. Right, and then right here, this is quick takedown, so I can take the slide off itself. I have my magazine release right here, so when I have a magazine in, it allows me to drop that magazine. Then obviously you have your trigger, right? All right, now that we know what all the levers and switches do on our pistol, we're gonna get into the condition in relation to the ammunition on the weapon. So the first thing is going to be red condition, which is where we have round in the chamber and ammunition in the magazine itself. The next is going to be amber, where we have no ammunition in the chamber, but ammunition in the magazine. And the third status is going to be green, which is no ammunition in the chamber, no ammunition in the magazine, or no magazine at all, right? So there's no ammunition present whatsoever. And that's the condition that we're going to be operating all of our dry firing from. And we take those painstaking steps to remove all the ammunition from the environment so we don't accidentally put our pistol into amber or red status unintentionally. Now that we have an understanding on what the different conditions are and what they entail, we're going to render this pistol, which is currently in a red, to a green status. And that's called clearing the pistol. So first thing I'm going to do, I always want to make sure I have my safety on whenever I have the availability. If my weapon doesn't have a safety, I'm not going to concern myself with it. Otherwise, I'll have it engaged. Next, I'm going to depress the magazine release and drop the magazine, which has the source of ammunition. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the slide. I'm going to pull it all the way to the rear. That's going to take the round that was in the chamber and eject it. And then when I do that, I want to make sure I'm pressing up on this lever, which is the slide lock release, and locking the slide to the rear. I'm going to look inside the magazine well, ensure that there's no ammunition inside there. Then I'm going to check the chamber, ensure that there's no ammunition present in the chamber. I'm going to let my slide go back forward. At this point, the pistol is rendered safe. One more note, if you're used to the military way on doing this, if you're ever storing your pistol, etc., after you've cleared it, you can go ahead and fire to ensure that the firing pin is forward. Place the weapon back on safe. If you're using an AR, you can't put it back on safe, and that is an indicator that your firing pin is forward and unable to expend a round. All right, moving on to loading procedures. So let's say I'm at the range, I've got an empty pistol, full magazines, and a target out in front of me, and I'm ready to fire at it. So I'm gonna go through my loading procedures, or to load and make ready. So throughout the rest of these series, you're gonna notice that I refer to the workspace. It's this kind of square in front of me that I'll be operating from the high ready. Anything below that's gonna be the low ready, but we'll talk about those positions later. Just understand that this is what I refer to as the workspace. So I drop my empty pistol into the workspace, the slide's forward, the safety's on, and I draw out one of my magazines, and I put it into the magazine well and slap it to ensure that it's seated fully. A lot of the times with a fully loaded mag, you'll have some resistance, so you'll want to slap that in. Next thing that you're going to do is you're going to grab the rear of the pistol, or if you're running dot sight, then you can grasp the front of the slide, pull to the rear, and let it go forward, and then you're going to pop the back of it. If there's any sort of bullet that's out of battery, if the casing's out of battery, it's going to look something like this, where the slide is slightly back, and then that popping to the back of it is going to ensure that the round is seated fully forward. Now, a round out of battery could possibly be struck in a rupture outside of the combustion area in your barrel, which could rupture the barrel itself, or it could blow up and damage your hands and or eyes. So it's very important to ensure that your round is seated fully forward. Another reason we go through all these loading procedures is I don't know how many times I've gone up to fire and I've had like no magazine in, or it's in but it's not fully seated, and I go up to fire and my magazine drops out. So we want to go through these loading procedures to ensure that we're not having any of those critical mistakes, especially when it comes to our carry pistols and our service rifles when we're in theater. So moving on to the actual shot process itself. So the shot process can be broken down into 3 elements, and those elements are going to be pre-shot, shot, and post-shot. And then we're going to go over the 4 fundamentals as well. So your grip and posture, your breathing, sight picture, and trigger control. All those things come together to make the shot process. Or there's also another acronym, which is SACM, SACM, which is your stability, your aim, your control, in your movement, which is the updated version for the Army. So when we talk about grip and posture with pistol, there's a lot of different variations, but the idea is you want to vice the pistol from left to right laterally. And you want to ensure that when you do fire, because recoil is going to happen, you're not going to stop it completely, that recoil resets down on the same point every time. So how we achieve that is, first thing I'm going to do is wrap my hand as high up into this dovetail as possible, and then letting my finger go along the slide, and my fingers are going to be as tied up into that trigger guard as possible. Now if we look on the other side, my thumb is going to be sitting up and allowing for this hand to be received on the other side. So I'm just going to take this hand and bring it up in sort of at this 45-degree angle. I'm going to clasp around my fingers, again getting that middle finger as close to that trigger guard as possible, and my thumb is going to be along the frame right here, and then my right thumb is going to lay on top of my left thumb. Now one word of caution here, don't cover up your slide lock release right here, because when you go and you fire until you're empty, your slide's going to be locked forward and you won't know that you're out of rounds. So right now we have our grip, and we want to try and cover as much surface area on this pistol as possible. So if you look back here, as little surface area is exposed as possible. So now we have a grip like this. I'm gonna bring just my elbows up, like I'm clamping a vise around my gun. So you'll feel your thumb and finger start to vise down around the frame of the pistol, and that'll lock it down from left to right. So when you do make a shot, it's not gonna fall off to the left, or it's not gonna fall off onto the right. So I think of it like I'm pulling up on an inverted horseshoe. So if I'm pulling up on that, my elbows slightly flare, and that creates that vise, right? And then I wanna make sure that I'm high up into that dovetail, because all of the recoil is going to be rocking back. So if my hand is too low on the pistol, then that pistol is going to rock back severely. There's a couple things that are bad about this. First of which is it's gonna take longer to reset on that target. And the second is if you don't have enough reciprocating force going forward, then you might cause a stovepipe. So there might not be enough tension going against the spring to actually allow the slide to go back forward all the way. And so what'll happen is the round will eject, and then the shell casing will get stuck into the slide and get slammed into it, and you've caused a malfunction. So we wanna make sure that we're as high up into that dovetail as possible, have a firm grip, about 50-50, as we are elevating our elbows but not shoulders slightly up. So if you are locking your shoulders out, there's a couple detriments to that too. So first and foremost, I'm reducing my ability to be mobile and have situational awareness. But more importantly, as I do that, I'm locking my elbows too, right? And so when there is recoil, it's moving my entire torso as one unit. If I keep just my elbows elevated, then it allows for my forearms and shoulders to kind of act as a shock absorber. So my arms are doing exactly what they're meant to naturally, rather than locking them out and having my entire body rock back and forth. So now that we've established just the grip, right? So we've just got our grip established at this point. Now we want to look at the body itself. So as I do this, I don't want to be leaning too far back. I want to have a slight rock forward and have my core engaged a little bit so that I'm leaned slightly into it. And again, this is just so as you're recoiling, you're not being pushed back more. And then I usually have my legs about shoulder width apart, and then in a generally athletic stance. You don't have to be too crazy about it, but generally athletic, just so you can, if you need to, start moving left or right and absorb a little bit more of that recoil. So from here, I have my entire stance. Should look something like that. So next I'm going to get into the breathing part of this. So this will be a little bit quicker. Generally, you don't want to fire at the top of your breath, and the reason why is as you inhale, it starts to create a lot of pressure in your chest, makes you less relaxed, and it starts to elevate your shoulders, right? I mean, even if you're breathing from your diaphragm, you're creating a lot of pressure and stress on your lungs. Also, when you go to fire, you won't have a natural point of reset. And what I mean by that is, when I breathe out, my body's completely relaxed and my hands have set into one spot, and I can hold that spot. Every time I breathe out, my hands go straight to the same spot. So as I recoil comes up, comes down, it goes right down into that same spot after I've exhaled. So you don't have to take one shot with every breath. So you can exhale, fire, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as long as you're falling right back onto that same spot every single time. Next is going to be our trigger control. So with trigger control, we want to make sure that we have our finger not fully wrapped around, right? We don't want this. That's bad. That's going to cause jerking over to either the left or the right, depending on how much pressure you're putting on it. What you want is just this part of your fingertip right here along the trigger itself, and then you want to have a squeeze straight back. So as you're squeezing, you don't want to push left or right at all. You just want to go straight back. And then your pistol will reset, right? So you fire, the slide goes back, it rechambers around, and then if you slowly release, then you're at your wall. So one thing to note is there's some slack here in the pistol. I want to take out that slack. That is called prepping the trigger. So you're preparing the trigger for the next shot. That's where you want to be. Now you don't necessarily have to go fire and slowly come off your pistol every time you want to reset. That'll actually slow you down significantly. But what you do want to do is fire, the slide resets, your finger comes off, and you've re-found that wall. So you rediscover that wall, ensure that you're back on the target and ready to shoot again. Fire, gun cycles, finger finds that wall, fire. Gun cycles, come back, find that wall, fire. That's going to be your trigger control. Again, there's a lot that can go wrong here. If you're pushing, pulling, if you're over gripping left or right, then your rounds are going to be thrown to the left or right. Now, finally, we're going to talk about sight picture. And I'll throw a little picture up here for you guys, but there's a couple of different sight pictures you can use, and it differs on if you're using iron sights or a dot sight. So before we get on to going into the sight picture itself, we have to determine which is our dominant eye. So if you take your finger and you point at something in the room, an object, and you cover it with your finger, you close one of your eyes. If your finger's still on the object, that's your dominant eye. And you can test this by closing your dominant eye, and your finger should appear to jump off of that object. Another way you can do this is by making this small gap in between your hands and then focusing it over an object, and then the same thing applies. If you close your eye, you can see that object, and if you close your non-dominant eye, then your hand will cover it up. It's the same method, just different execution. So now that we've determined what our dominant eye is, I'm going to talk about how we are going to be firing with both of our eyes open, and this applies to both rifle and pistol. So as I'm looking down my sights with my dominant eye, I'm going to have both of my eyes open. Now, if you have poor vision like myself, this really aids in being able to see a little bit more clearly both the front sight post, but also all of your surroundings. So if I'm making a transition from left to right or right to left, I want to make sure that I'm keeping both my eyes open so that I can quickly move over to that next target and fire on it. So I can already be eyeing it kind of out of the corner of my eye and ripped to that target. So if you are a new shooter and you're used to shooting with one eye closed, right? One way to defeat this is by taking your eye pro and then putting tape over your non-dominant eye. This is gonna force you to look only through this eye, but you can keep this one open without having to try and force it closed, right? So I'm keeping both my eyes open still, despite this one being taped over. A little bit more progressive of state, if you need to like wean yourself off of it, is if you use Vaseline to cover the non-dominant side, then you can slowly smudge it off and gain a little more clarity with every wipe away of that Vaseline. But now that we've determined how to kind of correct those issues, we can get into the actual sight picture itself. All right, so for sight picture, I've drawn out a couple of different diagrams here. I'm gonna focus on the commercial pistol first and then get into service issued pistol sights. So the first thing we're gonna go over is building that sight picture. If you notice here, if you look down the back of your pistol, you'll notice that there's this rear sight block and then this front sight block. So that's gonna be your front sight posts and your rear sights. Now what you wanna do is you wanna build a castle with that. What I mean is you want your front sight posts to be level with your rear sights, and then you want to ensure that there's equal space in this void right here between your front sight post and the rear sight. So it's all gonna be lined up and even. That ensures that you're staying dead center and not deviating left or right. Now, when you're actually firing, your point of aim is going to be off of the tip of the front iron sight post, and you're gonna be bisecting the target. So if your target is a full circle, you'll be cutting that circle in half, and off of the tip of your front sight post is where your point of impact is going to be. So we're gonna get into the focus of it now. So if I'm looking down these sights, I have 3 focal points, right? I have a far focal point and I have a near focal point. That's gonna be my target and my rear sights. And then I'm gonna have that center focal point. That's going to be my front sight post. When I'm actually building my sight picture and firing, I wanna make sure that my focus is on the front sight post. So if I am looking and focusing at my target afar and my front sight post and rear sight post are blurry, then my sight picture is going to be inaccurate and my rounds aren't gonna impact where they need to be. So as Ryan Kleckner says, focus on the reticle, steady pressure on the trigger. We're gonna do the same for our front sight post. Focus on the front sight post, steady pressure on the trigger, and when you break your shot, you'll make an accurate shot right there into the center of your target. Now, it doesn't matter that your target is slightly out of focus. It will be when it's at greater distances. And so that's what your sight picture is going to look like for a commercial pistol. So moving on to service pistol, specifically speaking about the M17, not to be confused with the M17 P320. This is still a commercial model pistol and it still has that same sight, sight 0. So the M17 issued pistol has what's called a combat 0, and what that is the point of aim, point of impact is down the center of this block. So you're actually going to cover your whole target, and down the center of this block is your point of impact. So rather than cutting that target in half, you're just gonna put that block over it, and that's where your point of impact is. Now, if you're trying to shoot for precision, that's very difficult to do. You're gonna have to make some adjustments off of that. But just understand that if you take a look at this and this, you're already dropping, if you're dead on, like pointing directly at this piece of paper, you're already dropping about a centimeter, right? So if you multiply that by 30 yards, because that's the deviation for your angular kind of split there, then you're gonna be grouping significantly lower. So if you're an experienced shooter and you've noticed that with the M17 that your groups are landing, few inches, 6 inches or so lower at like 30 yards, that's probably the reason behind that. Now, if you're an inexperienced shooter and you're shooting the M17 and your rounds are impacting low, you're probably anticipating the recoil. Check out my live fire videos to assess and correct that problem. Now let's talk about dot sights really quick. A couple things to note on those is you're gonna have 2 different types of co-witness. You're gonna have your absolute co-witness. So when we talk about co-witness, it's where the dot lies in relation to the iron sights when you have a sight picture. So an absolute co-witness is going to be, the dot is going to be directly above where your point of aim, point of impact will be for the pistol. So if this was a commercial set of iron sights, then my point of aim, point of impact for the red dot would be directly above that front iron sight post, also known as lollipopping. Or we can have the lower 1/3 co-witness. That is where the red dot is actually going to be above the front iron sight post. And that's so that you can actually cover that target up with that dot and not have the rest of it be obscured with your front iron sight post. So that's just a couple of additional considerations with the red dot. So now that we have the 4 fundamentals under our belt, we can get into the shot process itself. So this is gonna put it all together for us. So again, the shot process is composed of 3 parts. It's the pre-shot, the shot, and the post-shot. So during pre-shot, this is where I'm presenting on my target. I'm getting PID. I'm settling down into my natural point of aim, and then I'm prepping that trigger. And then during the shot itself, I'm focusing on that front sight post, steady trigger pressure until the shot is broken. And post-shot is when recoil happens. I'm resetting on that trigger, coming back down to my natural point of aim, and I'm also going through my follow-through steps. So follow-through not necessarily meaning that I need to make any movement for it, but ensuring that my follow-through was good and steady. Now, part of that is understanding when you've made an error. So if I'm firing and I put too much pressure into my left hand and I fire off to the right, if I can identify that during the shot and I can call, okay, I'm gonna be to the right by an inch because of how much excess pressure I put into my left hand, causing my gun to drift right, that's part of the diagnostic steps that you'll have to understand to get better at shooting as you do these drills. So when I come up to do my dry firing or my live firing, I'm calling my shot at that point, right? So I go up, present, fire, and then if I'm squeezing too much with my trigger finger, might be off to the left. If I'm anticipating a recoil, then I'm gonna be dipping down. And if I'm firing outside of my sight alignment, right? If my front sight post is above my rear sights, I'm gonna be hitting high. Or if I'm racing to get back on a consecutive shot and I'm squeezing too early, I'm not actually lined up with my sight picture, then I'm gonna be hitting high. If I can call those deficiencies after I've made that shot, that's where I want to be able to make that correction, and then my next shot should be accurate. So that's the shot process itself. That's where we're presenting again. Settling into that natural point of aim. Prep the trigger. Steady pressure on the trigger as I focus on the front sight post. Fire. Recoil happens, resetting on the trigger, falling back down into that natural point of aim. Fire, and rinse, repeat for as many shots as you need to do that. So obviously the cadence is going to be different for every single engagement you have. I'm not going to be doing slow firing like that on a target that's 5 yards full size, right? Maybe if I'm doing like a 1-inch dot, or slow it down for a 4-inch or 4 MOA A zone at 15 yards, or 5 yards, 15 feet. But if I'm doing a full size target, then it's probably going to be closer to a speed like that, where my shot process happens from here, and then as I'm presenting, I'm getting that sight picture, prepping the trigger, and firing. But if you're a beginner, then just slow down, ensure that you're taking good, accurate shots, and then maintain that stable position, no trigger jerking, setting down into that rest, and then firing. Just a little recap, we went over safety, the conditions of the pistol, clearing the pistol, preparing to fire, the 4 fundamentals, and then the shot process. And then we also went over equipment. So in the future videos, I'm gonna go over some live fire practices, how to take these specific tools and then bring them to the range to validate them. And then I'm also going to go over some of the more manipulation-based tasks, so like reloads and malfunctions and transitions and such in another video. So everything we learned here is to be used to dry fire at home in a safe environment and start to get the foundations of our shooting, and then we'll go out and live fire at the range. We'll validate that what we're doing is good, and then we'll come back home and make any refinements we need to. And again, next video is going to be a bunch of manipulation-based stuff, so stick around.